Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for November 28th. We have 19 items on our agenda. The last two items are updates or informational presentations. So 1 through 17 are actionable. I have been asked to pull the following items: 1, 5, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17. So those will be discussed individually. If you are here about items 2, 3, 4, or 6 through 10 and would like them discussed individually, please let me know now so we can pull them and do that for you. Anybody here for any of those other items? All right, well, seeing no one, then is there a motion on the other items?
Consent on the remaining items.
All right, moved by Pittner.
Second.
Seconded by Padragula. Any discussion? Call the roll.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes. We'll then start with item number 1, which is the 2018 nuisance abatement project final payment. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Straight.
Second.
Seconded by Pittner. Discussion. I believe Alderman Straight pulled this. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Chairman Janser. I guess I just wanted to start by the abundance of phone calls I've received recently are just about sand, kind of the dirtiness of the community. I see there's a lot of very positive action taking place to clean up our community, but I think that a conversation that could be had would be, how could we better identify nuisances more quickly? We have twice a week garbage service moving around the community. We have other city departments that are moving around the community. And I guess I just wanted to raise it as a discussion point of how we could better identify, and I think residents would appreciate us moving in a more forceful manner of how we address this. I know it's a staff timing issue, it's an enforcement issue, but I clearly think that there are many in the community, especially because Public Works has their hands full with so many properties, of how we could more quickly address and try to abate some of this, because it's an ongoing concern for many in the community, and they don't see us asserting ourselves more thoroughly in how we're going to long-term address and maintain some of these areas. So I just wanted to put that out there to start.
Alderman Padragula.
I wanted to second what Alderman Straight said. I've always been very concerned about the zombie homes, and we're making a dent in those and some of the other properties. But I think there are also a lot of homes in the community that are not kept up, where yards are very dirty, and I wouldn't say abandoned cars, but cars. There are 2 within a couple of blocks of my house where trash is strewn over the front lawn. Cars are parked every which ways in the driveway, and they really take away from the residents. Most of them, I think, really do try to do a good job to keep up their properties. We certainly don't want the police cruising the streets looking for problems. But on the other hand, I think it is an issue, and it affects the whole community, and it certainly affects neighboring property owners. One of the things I was impressed with, I'm proposing kind of a model for dealing with this, was with the assessment people. I sat in on one of their meetings, and they spent a lot of time looking at different photographs of different houses, trying to figure out what was a fair price and how this house compared to that. And I don't think it would be that difficult to go around and take some pictures of these houses and make some clear defining line between what is just a messy house and a bad neighbor and something that really is a nuisance. And I think in some cases it's very obvious. I think we certainly want to protect property rights and people's freedoms, but also if someone is maintaining a piece of property or not maintaining it, or maintaining it in a very substandard fashion, I think there's a problem. And I don't know that it needs to be subjective. We can't come up with a dollar value like the assessors do, but I think there's a methodology there. If you look at 100 pictures, I think most people could decide which are the 5 or 10 outliers, and I think we should maybe be more assertive with those. So I would echo what Shannon's saying. I think we do need to be a little bit more aggressive in that regard.
Further discussion? Alderman Wolski.
President Chancellor, thank you. I'll third all of that. A number of the calls I get are related to the current aesthetics of the community right now. And so let's just keep working on it, keep chewing on it. And for my part, I'll do better at my own place too. I'm not the most fastidious caretaker, but I can get better personally.
Further discussion? Seeing none, call the roll.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Dancer,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padraguli.
Yes.
That motion is carried. That takes us to item number 5, which is the final payment for the Minot Swift Action B storm sewer outfall televising and inspection. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Alderman Straight,
Second.
second by Mayor Sitma. Discussion. Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Chairman Janser. I guess I had a couple questions for Mr. Jonason probably on this. Thanks, Dan. I guess I'm curious, Dan, when we're doing this televising, are we only looking at the inflow water, the outflow into the dead loops? Are we ever looking at the gate structures allowing water in and out of the active river?
President Chancellor, Alderman Straight, we're looking at all of that. We're televising the entire pipes, anything that penetrates through the flood line of protection into the river, and all of the culverts, gate wells, flap gates, all of the structures in and out of the dead loops. So they've all either been televised or videoed by a diver to look at the condition of all of them. So we have a report on them so that we can move forward with the assessment on cleaning if there's sediment in them, or repairs or replacement if there's damages or issues that need to be corrected.
Great. I was curious, Dan, because last, maybe 2 weeks ago, I saw the city vehicles basically in the Nubbin Park dead loop, and it kind of raised that question of like, one, what are we doing with our vehicles physically in the dead loop? But is there new technology out there of how we're collecting garbage, refuse that's going into the dead loop? Are we, is there new stuff like that that's out there? And how many gate structures? You know, I've stepped on a lot of culverts and things that, I'll tell you, the Oak Park one that's kind of on the northeast side of the river there is incredibly rotten. I bet if anybody goes down and stands on it, they could fall right in. Is there any new technology out there where we can consider how we can allow water in and out?
President Janser, Alderman Straight, I'm sure there is. You know, we look at that on whether it's, I guess, cost effective. First of all, out there, you know, there are different things that have been tried. For example, like a collection device. Kind of a storm water tornado, they call it, that goes down into a catch basin. The only problem with that is, you know, where you have a large pipe or a lot of flow going into it, you're going to sit there all day long and clean it out, trying to get the silt out of it. And that's what we were doing in the Nubbin Loop, is removing sand from the sand salt operations that has accumulated in there through the storm system over the years. Getting it out of there so that the low flows can be restored again through there.
Sure. Great. I appreciate seeing that, because it's disgusting to residents, obviously, and it's been going on for 50 years, whenever. So
we also did a portion of the Oak Park dead loop cleaning just on the end of Wildwood Avenue. There was a sandbar, for lack of a better term, from an outfall there. So that was part of our maintenance work that we're doing under our levy work, SWIFT stuff, with our own forces instead of contracting out.
is this the end now, Dan, of the SWIFT work and the telescoping, televising, or?
President Janser, Alderman Straight, no.
Okay.
This SWIFT B was just the televising of it. We're on SWIFT D now. That's improvements that we're making. There will probably be at least 2 more projects to address the different deficiencies and issues along the existing levee system.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan.
Alderman Wolski.
Thank you. Dan, you kind of mentioned the report that was delivered as a result of this particular work. What we expected, more substantial than what we expected in terms of what's going to be required to get the system back to the condition the Corps expects?
President Janser, Alderman Wolski, from what I've seen of it, actually I think it's probably a little better than we expected. You know, I think we knew there was going to be some issues with the pipes going into the dead loops, and there are. Some of them are some issues where we're probably going to have to do some pipe replacement. Some of it is just cleaning. It's just a matter of getting in there and to be able to do the cleaning now. Some of them are very large pipes, you know, 8-foot diameter pipes that have 4-5 feet of silt in the bottom of them, which carries back into the dead loop. It's not going to be easy or cheap to get it clean, but all in all, I think the pipes are probably in a little better shape than I anticipated they would be.
Dan, is the condition that we are in now the result of that 50 years of history that Alderman Straight referred to? I mean, most of this infrastructure went in the late 70s or somewhere in there, right?
Mr. President, yes. It's a combination. The 2011 flood had an impact on some of these pipes, but I would say most of it is just due to the age of the pipes. A lot of it are old CMP or metal pipes that were put through there that have rusted out in the bottom. They've well exceeded their life expectancy. So that's a lot of the issue is not using, that's one of the benefits of using concrete instead of metal in the soils we have around here. They tend to eat up the metal pipe fairly quickly.
Okay, thank you. Alderman Straight, do you have something further?
Just one more, Dan. It made me think of, in Eastwood Park, Dan, we've seen a larger kind of culvert structure that's come in, obviously, for drainage, probably coming out of South Minot that drains down and in. I saw ones going in over on kind of behind Robindale Trailer Park, kind of across from Gold Nugget Trailer Park. When we're bringing larger volumes of water into the dead loops like that, is there any concern on the other end of, in a emergency situation, the gate structure going back into the active river, or is that not much of a concern because it just so rarely happens?
President Janser, Alderman Straight, no. There's a lot of storage capacity, you know, in those dead loops, and the pump stations we have, I think, are adequately sized. You know, if you get a real excessive rain event, like we saw a few years ago, I believe it was 2015 or 16, where we had a lot of rain going on. We got several inches of rain. You know, the existing pump stations couldn't keep up. We brought in additional pumps and set up to take care of it when we saw the dead loop levels coming up higher than we like to see them. So,
thanks, Dan. Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, we'll call the roll. Please.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
That motion is carried. We are now moving to item number 11, which is a real estate transfer based on the 27th Avenue Northwest Regional Stormwater Retention Pond. Is there a motion?
Motion to approve.
Moved by the mayor,
Second.
seconded by Alderman Straight. Discussion. Alderman Wolski?
President Janser, thank you. Question for Mr. Meyer. Do we know, do we have a sense of how much accepting ownership of this is going to cost us on an annual operation and maintenance basis? And second part, are there any known or future capital or replacement costs that we're going to have to bear in mind for the future?
City manager? Or, I'm sorry, city engineer?
Yeah, don't call me that. Mr. President, Alderman Wolski, as far as the O&M costs for that facility, it's not going to be substantial. It's essentially an existing pond. It's been there for, well, forever. And it's essentially just mowing that Public Works may have to do on the edges. The rest of it is natural grass that's grown there. We have had some weed problems in the past in that area. That's largely been rectified. We have some touch-up seeding that the developer will take care of in the spring on one of the corners. Other than that, all the infrastructure that feeds into that pond is brand new. All of the work is completed. The punch lists are completed, so it's good infrastructure.
Follow up?
Lance, if it's been there forever, what precipitates the exchange to take place now? Well, why do we take this on?
Mr. President, Alderman Wolski, that was an existing lake. We call it Ballantine Lake. It really doesn't have a name, but the Ballantine family owned that property for many years. Essentially, it was a landlocked slough, and it had no outlet. And as that area was developing around Ramstead School, all the subdivisions up in that area, instead of having individual detention ponds on all of those individual developments, it's more cost effective for the city if we can consolidate those facilities in one regional detention pond. And so that was a concept that was adopted here. The developer did an overall stormwater management report for that entire area. It's probably 300 acres approximately. And the infrastructure was sized and installed to be able to handle all of those subdivisions in the future and pipe the stormwater to that natural lake. And then we set an outlet elevation on it so that nature will take care of it, where if we have a big rain, it'll store the 100-year event and then slowly discharge it. And actually goes out through the airport property to Livingston Coulee, which is the natural outlet. So we were able to regulate that existing lake and then utilize it for regional detention for Northwest Minot.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Lance.
You're welcome.
Further discussion? Seeing none, please call the roll.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Motion carried. Item number 12 is next. This is regarding the city retaining wall and a request for qualifications for that project. Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Moved by Pittner,
Second.
seconded by the mayor. Discussion. Alderman Wolski?
Yeah, thank you, President Janser. I'm going to share some comments regarding this. We talked about it a little bit at budget time, or at the very least, I think I mentioned that I would appreciate having this brought before us prior to, more formal consideration. Lance, thank you for putting it on our agenda. This item's here because it's been on our capital improvement plan since going back to 2016. The project was born from a council action in May of 2015, and this plan was ultimately adopted in April of 2016. It's a pretty significant project, and I have concerns about the benefits. I have some concerns about a few other things, and so I just want to outline those. The questions about cost. Before we advance this particular project, I think we should get a sense of how much we're spending on an annual basis to maintain the current rock face. I haven't seen that information yet because I haven't requested it, so I'm requesting that now. What I'd like to see is what it's been costing us, looking maybe back to the past 5 years, both in terms of time and cash, and what it's expected to cost us over the next 5 years if we didn't act or we did nothing at all. My assumption is we've been patching and addressing problem areas on an ad hoc on an ad hoc basis as best we can, but I'd like to see those costs in terms of and be able to evaluate them against the overall investment that we're contemplating here. I also have some questions about the alternatives that have been considered prior to this, the adoption of this recommendation. The report in 2016 was delivered by KLJ. I reviewed it over the last few days. It seems to be built on the assumption that walls were the only acceptable alternative. Maybe the geotechnical analysis provided by Braun Intertek establishes that fact. Some of this stuff gets a little hard to understand when you're reading technical reports, but it does seem to suggest that the slope of the wall is generally stable. And so if that's the circumstance with the underlying substructure, I'm wondering why we didn't explore alternatives like planting vegetation. It seems like to me it might be a remarkably less expensive alternative than excavating the base and putting up what are essentially vertical walls. I'm going to share a quote here from that report from Braun Intertek's letter. I think it was dated February 9, 2016. This was delivered to KLJ. Quote, "It appears that any existing wall damage is due to cracking and subsequent movement of the wall facing and not global slope movement. The geotechnical analysis suggests that wall damage is due to superficial failure, while also suggesting that the bond between the grout and boulders is critical in holding the slope face in position. If the bond between the grout and boulders disappears, the factor of safety for the slope facing decreases to the point that any additional driving force could cause more damage to the wall facing." Again, when I read this, I don't see, and again, happy to stand and be corrected, but I don't see our engineers telling us we have a catastrophic slope failure that we're protecting against. The document goes on in the next paragraph to suggest, quote, "We were informed that you plan to use a ready rock type MSE wall to replace the existing retaining walls. The following report provides our recommendations for retaining wall structure support and construction considerations for the project." I introduce that because that particular clause itself gives me some pause. We hire these consultants to deliver what I would say are unbiased reports and an exploration of alternatives. And when I read a statement like that we were informed that you plan to use a ready rock MSE wall system to replace the existing retaining walls, it feels to me like we had maybe seeded the process a little bit to encourage a review of an outcome we wanted to see. And so, again, I want to see the costs associated with some of the alternatives, including vegetation. I know there are steel support structures that occasionally get considered in projects like this. Where are the costs associated with those alternatives, and did we vet them? I didn't see them in the document. Alderman, for us, I think there is an issue here associated with community priorities. As a city council, our official responsibility is the city of Minot's business, but there is no board above us that is forced to prioritize larger community needs. The system by which Minot on the whole operates is imperfect. Sometimes it sets our projects in competition with projects from other political subdivisions. That really should invite us, at the very least, to be mindful of the priorities of our partner political subdivisions, Minot Public Schools, Minot Park District, and the county. The school board is meeting tomorrow in a retreat to discuss and try and figure out their problem of how to build schools that are going to accommodate 700 student class sizes that are coming through the system right now. They don't have the luxury of simply raising a tax or implementing a new tax. They need to take that to the voters if they need to issue a bond, and it's got to pass by a 60-40 margin. In the spirit, I can't support advancing this project because the taxpayers and the citizens do not separate us. They see us as the government, and they are going to have problems with advancing a retaining wall as a need in this community when it's matched up against other needs, like the fact that we do not have enough classroom space for our students. But beyond the community needs, I have specific concerns about whether I would even prioritize this as a city need. If I were to hold this up against a project like the First Avenue North Avenue from the Amtrak station over to 3rd Street, which we have discussed many times. But that particular project isn't even on our capital improvement plan. If I were to weigh these two projects next to each other, I would much rather spend $30,000 a year patching that retaining wall and making the investment in the $3 million investment in First Avenue. So if I were to hold these projects together and have to decide between the two of them, there's very little chance that I would support this project over that. So with some of those thoughts, one final point here, and I appreciate y'all indulging me on this long and rambling position, but I have some strong opinions on this particular project. The memo from Mr. Meyer appropriately points out that one of the benefits that we would gain from this is 50 parking spaces here at City Hall. I'm not sure that that's actually a benefit for us, given what we are contemplating in terms of possibly relocating City Hall. That conversation is just getting started, but I don't see an extraordinary demand for parking around this building right now, except for on circumstances where we have very busy and big meetings. And even in those events, we have relatively close overflow parking at both the library and up the hill at the auditorium. So with that in mind, neither tax dollars nor the public trust are unlimited resources, and I am very concerned that if we advance this project in our previously recommended form, we'll be giving up more of both of those things than I think we can afford. Thank you for indulging.
Mr. President.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Walski, and I don't mean to be tongue-in-cheek, but I almost disagree with everything you just said. Looking at this geologically, with all of the sand and the gravel that comes down every time those wash, looking at the geological makeup of our hills, which is exactly what these walls contain, is sand and gravel. Hiawatha is a perfect example. Every time it rains, we see wash coming down from those hills, and if left unprotected, absolutely, we would see, if not slumping, sliding from underneath the infrastructure that we have in place. Regardless of whether or not the City Hall moves, and if the police department were to take over this, we do have an extraordinary need for more access as a growing city and forward looking into this, and it comes down to protecting our infrastructure and our facilities that we have in place, the infrastructure that is the road and the parking lots that are above the building. This is something that should have been addressed substantially long time ago, and it's been kicked down the road. Now it's in front of us. I think we have to maintain what we have, or at least start to take care of it. I look at it from the standpoint of what's behind it and what we're trying to keep together, rather than the long-term pontification of priorities. This is one that just got kicked down the road, and yeah, would a nice retaining wall that has extraordinarily large ornamental design on it look better than concrete rock? Absolutely, but there again, we also have to be stewards of what it is that we're taking care of. I am going to support it.
Alderman Wolski.
If I just may briefly respond, I appreciate your opinion, Mayor. That's why we have these debates. What I am suggesting is not that we disregard the current circumstances of the wall. I'm simply questioning the proposal in which we are going about or proposing to address the issue.
Alderman Pittner.
I guess maybe can Lance speak to this a little bit, give some information. Maybe are there alternatives that we could consider versus decorative walls or vegetation? Is there somewhere in between, or?
Certainly, Mr. President, members of council, just a couple of things, hopefully to give you the information you need. We can find as much as we can the costs that we've had into this. The Public Works Department would be able to hopefully find some of that information for us. Unfortunately, in this case, a vegetative slope just isn't an option. And the reason why is when you're dealing with 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 slopes, with the volume of water that comes over that, that hill. We've taken care of a lot of that, but it's still going to come on a big rain, and if it's only vegetation, it will erode away worse than the situations that we have now with grouted riprap. Grouted riprap is not a retaining wall system. It is essentially just a veneer that protects the underlying soils from erosion. That's all that is. And so when you start having holes develop in that, whether it's at the top or the bottom or somewhere in between, it's like a chink in your armor. Water gets in there somehow and starts to erode the underlying soils, and eventually you will lose global stability in your soils. Today they're fine, but over time, if maintenance isn't done, and eventually there will be a point where there's just nothing to grout back together, you will have sections of that wall fail. It's going to happen. And so whether we fix it today or sometime down the road, that's a debate we can have, but I guarantee you we'll have a slope failure at some point. So we need to address it. Regarding the Ready Rock alternatives, when Braun Intertech first did the soil borings in that was one of the options that was looked at. So you have to start somewhere. Large block retaining walls are a very common application for situations just like ours. However, if you look in the final report, the alternative that was most cost effective and for our situation here was a soldier pile retaining wall with a concrete veneer face. If you go over to Hillcrest Avenue, we did that wall at about the same time because that one, same situation. We had grouted riprap retaining wall, 1-to-1, 1-to-2 slope, and there were sections of it that were starting to come off. Of course, there we have a public street and water and sewer that had to be protected. So we spent over $1 million to install a wall to protect that. Same situation will exist here. So we looked at 5 or 6 different retaining wall types. It's all detailed out in the study, all have costs, different levels of solutions that go with those walls, and eventually the soldier pile retaining wall was selected for the main wall. The smaller walls, you can use a system like the Ready Block or some other mass block retaining system. It's fairly common. Again, on the global stability, the faster that we take care of this, the more protected we're going to be. So it's just a matter of managing risk. Do we feel comfortable in the level of risk that we have today, or do we delay the project, accepting the fact that as time goes on, there will be more risk with that retaining wall? I'd be happy to answer any other questions you have.
Alderman Wolski?
Thank you. Lance, again, my concern with this is that we have not evaluated the other alternatives. It's my understanding that the 6th Street underpass did a pretty good job of capturing a lot of the water that would have been previously cascading over the wall. Did we evaluate the cost of capturing the water in, let's say, the auditorium parking lot on the north side and on the west side, channeling that maybe directly towards the north, and really stopping the water infiltration problem before it got, and would that drainage issue, addressing that above the wall, allow us to perhaps get away with a vegetation surface? I guess as I look around town and I look at the south side of the town and country center, I see a slope there that looks very similar. Again, I'm not an engineer, I don't know the slopes, but the 1, 1, 1, 2, large portions of this particular project are at 2 or less, not necessarily all on this portion of the wall. But as I look at these other circumstances around town, we've been getting away with it. That road's been there, 11th Avenue's been there for as long as I can remember.
Yeah, Mr. President, Alderman Wolski, it wouldn't be my recommendation to do any kind of vegetative slope. I just don't think it's going to solve the issue that we have here. Yes, we did address most of the, I'd call it cascade flooding that occurred before we did the 6th Street project in some of the 3rd Avenue storm sewer work. However, perched groundwater behind that wall, there is no drainage system. So anytime you design a retaining wall, it's either going to fail because it's going to slide away, or there's going to be so much pressure on the back side of it that it'll overturn, it'll tip over. And so right now there is no way to relieve any kind of groundwater pressure behind what we have out there. So we may take care of the I guess the waterfall effect, but we're not going to take care of the groundwater effect that we have to deal with currently behind there. And the only way to install a good drain tile system, if you will, behind there is to remove the wall to install it. So if you remove it, what did you really gain? Then you might as well take it the rest of the way and put the soldier pile wall in with the veneer to complete the rest of the project.
Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Chairman Janser. Lance, is there as far as I'm concerned, I look at this as priorities. Is there a buys us time kind of middle of the road solution here where we move partway in one direction? I'm mindful that the NDR money has to be spent by 2022. We're looking at relocating City Hall. We're talking about that priority. I'll be very honest that I was very mindful when I made the motion a couple of years ago to spend what I think was close to $60,000 on some upgrades for this facility for handicap accessibility, knowing full well that we were going to relocate City Hall. You know, yes, we're going to keep, the discussion has always been, we're going to keep this room for these meetings, but is there a middle of the road solution here? I'm $3.1 million over the course, you know, for this project. I just think in terms of what is needed in our community right now, in what I want for my personal life is huge. What I'm able to pay for is, you know, on priorities is the reality, and I just don't know if this $3 million is the most prudent, best spent dollars in terms of our priorities right now. So is there a middle of the road solution?
Mr. President, Alderman Straight, that is exactly why we bring these projects in front of you before we go out for engineering solutions. Because when we lay out these projects in the capital improvements plan, you know, believe it or not, we put a lot of thought into where these will fit into our plan, how important they are, what should be prioritized over what. You know, this project has been delayed now for several years, and we felt that as time goes on, the city accumulates more risk on this project. We think it's a priority that should be done in the near future, within the next couple of years, and that's why it's going to take us probably a good portion of the summer to design this out, and I don't think construction would get started until late fall into next spring. It just really depends on, in spring of 20, just depends on how the design goes and what we think we could accomplish. The problem with trying to phase this project in, and that's why we broke it out into separate walls. Wall 2, which is the largest wall and the most expensive wall because of the height and the restrictions that we have to work with, there's not a good breaking point where you can say, well, we'll do this portion and we'll stop here and we'll do the other portion later. Because this is such specialized work, you know, you have to bring in specialized pile driving equipment. When we did the Hillcrest wall, they actually augured those piles in. That might have to be an option here. We're not sure yet. You're going to get more bang for the buck, if you will, if you do more wall rather than keep mobilizing in these specialized contractors. And then you have a problem with where do you stop the wall, and then how do you make that joint work so that you don't sacrifice your new wall compared to the old one if water or something would get in there, because now you have another weak point with that joint. And that's why when we do these, you almost have to do the whole thing at a time.
Sure.
Follow up, Chairman Jansen, maybe Lance, if it's maybe for you or Mr. Barry or Mr. Lakefield, if it struck me that we were looking at using Hub City funding to pay for this all of a sudden. Maybe I'm just more aware of where we're spending Hub City funding all of a sudden, or I'm seeing it utilized more frequently. If we didn't use that, would we do this?
City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. President. Alderman Straight, we would eventually need to do this regardless of the funding source. The question is, and Mr. Meyer has addressed it pretty well, it's all a matter of risk. We pay, or we're about to pay, over $700,000 a year for insurance for all of our facilities. We hope we never have to use it. If we don't, that's $700,000 annually that the city spends. You can kind of look at this wall the same way. It's not a wonderful project that we can point to and say, yay, look at this, you know, is just fantastic for our community. This is protecting vital infrastructure, you know, City Hall at this point in time, the police station, our dispatch center. the auditorium as well, because if this slope does fail, we don't know how far back it'll fail. That's one of the concerns. And I know it's a hard project for the council to sort of look at and get excited about. I totally get that. But it is a project that at some point in time we have to accomplish, and regardless of what the funding source is, it needs to get accomplished. So that would be my advice.
Mr. Lakefield, did you have something to add?
Mr. President, I would just like to address Alderman Straight's question on Hub City funding. This was a little bit of an item that was missed in the budgeting process. It was originally in the CIP for sales tax funds. The money was budgeted in the sales tax fund, but because of the way the accounting rules are, you cannot transfer directly from the sales tax fund to the capital projects. It has to go through the general fund. The money was transferred or budgeted into the general fund and was omitted from the budget from the general fund back into the capital project. So we missed the second step. So essentially we were short that amount of money in the general fund to fund the project. So when this came up, we had some savings from other projects that had been completed that had Hub City funding as the funding source, and that is available to be used in these capital projects. So that's why we elected to use that savings from other projects to fund this. So we didn't have to go back and come up with a budget amendment or another funding source.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Alderman Wolski.
President Janser, thank you. One kind of follow-up question here from Mr. Meyer. Lance, was the possibility of pulling in at the auditorium parking lot by 15 or 20 feet and lessening the overall slope? We would lose a little parking up in the auditorium, but we would potentially save the cost of millions of dollars worth of walls and potentially eliminate the risk. Was an option like that evaluated?
Mr. President, Alderman Wolski, I do not believe it was. I think we tried to maximize the amount of parking and drive aisle surface that we had. So I do not believe we looked at that.
Okay. Council, any further questions for city engineer? Alderman Wolski had something else?
Yeah, President Jansen, I'm going to move to table this until later this spring when we have an opportunity to evaluate this project in accordance with our new capital improvement projects plan, and it also gives staff time to address some of the concerns. Maybe there's an opportunity to perform some evaluations on some of these yet to be considered alternatives.
Second. Seconded by Alderman Straight. A question for the motion maker. Later in the spring is kind of a imprecise. I mean, do you want to tie
certainly
time to that somehow?
I think the expectation is that we're going to have an adjustment to our capital improvement plan review and prioritization process. So I would suggest we take this project at the same time we take the other projects that are going to be programmed on our capital improvement plan in years coming.
Okay. Alderman Potter-Gula.
I wanted to ask some clarification from the city manager. In the past, we've been presented with this capital improvements plan, and I wonder what your intention is in terms of the timing of that and the process of putting it together. I think what Alderman Wolski is envisioning is a more in-depth and robust discussion before it becomes finalized as a plan. And I guess I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. I know we've had I think the past couple of years had very, very productive discussions about the budget. We were able to work things out as a council in conjunction with staff. And I think what I'm hearing here from at least a couple of people on the council is a desire for more involvement by the council earlier in the process of setting these priorities. So I guess I was just wondering, when you have scheduled the capital improvements plan and how you're proposing that we formulate that.
Mr. President, Alderman Potter-Gula, thank you for the question. Alderman Wolski is maybe more knowledgeable on the subject than the rest of you because he's taken an interest and he and I have had conversations about this very thing. So he is correct. We are working right now toward a 5-year capital improvement plan document. This document will identify all of our infrastructure and capital project needs for the next 5 years, and it'll do it on a essentially department by department basis. And in each of the departments, we will prioritize based upon an objective rating criteria what the priority are of those projects. And then we'll be bringing that plan to the City Council annually so that the City Council can evaluate the prioritization of those projects and also evaluate the merit of the projects and their order and those sorts of things. That document will then inform the budget. And then that way we're sure to bring the most highest priority projects to the City Council and include it in that budget. The process that we've envisioned at this point in time would allow us to essentially do this work annually and have the capital projects plan revision to the City Council sometime February, March or so. Then it would be discussed at the council and hopefully finalized or adopted for that year. And the projects that were rated up would be essentially slotted in under the amount of available resources we had on a department by department basis, so that we could just kind of work down the list as best we could with available resources. That also gives the City Council some insight as to whether or not, based upon how over the years we're progressing on knocking these projects off, if we have enough money or not enough money, and that will help inform the revenue side of the equation in the budget as well. All of this is envisioned to be a best management practice and start our process off in about February or March of this year. So Mr. Meyer, along with myself and the finance director and many of the other department heads, are in this process now in developing essentially the first edition of this capital projects plan. I can tell you the first edition will not be as wonderful as we envision because, you know, it's a first cut and we're going to need to go through a couple iterations. But we do hope to have that 4-year review as a first edition in February or March time. So that's the plan at this point, and be happy to answer any questions you have about that.
So following up on that, is the intent then of the administration to work within each department, have each department develop its plan, and then at some point compare the department priorities? Is that, do you see that as something you would be doing independently, or just as something you see us having a role in? Because I could see us wanting to maybe shuffle. Maybe we go down 2 or 3 in one department and just 1 in another.
Mm-hmm. Mr. President, Alderman Padragula, that is a fantastic question. It is something yet to be answered. There are a number of approaches that cities take in that process. Some cities will say the fire department gets X percentage of the total revenue to run its operation, and in that they have to pay for operations, capital, personnel, those sorts of things. So figure it out and bring us the best that you can do on the capital side. And the same thing happens in police, and the same thing happens in other departments. Other cities actually look at it and compare projects against one another from various departments. The challenge always there is, how do you evaluate a project that might be public health and safety, or against, you know, recreation, against something else? And we do that kind of work now. You folks have been used to doing that. And there's usually some give and take. Maybe there's a little bit more money available for this fire project, and so police doesn't have as much needs, and so they're willing that year to devote a little bit more of the funding that maybe they would have had to that fire particular project. Those sorts of logistics are things that are going to have to be worked out. What we're simply going to do is provide you information that will better inform you of the long-term capital needs for the city by a department basis, and then you folks can say, it's important to us to do it this way or that way or the other way. Those details will come later, so we don't really have a recommendation for you on that front. We're going to be in a better position to provide that for you after the document gets developed. One thing I do have the finance department working on is the development of affordability budgets. That sort of takes the appearance like the first option I just mentioned to you, whereby each department is set a designated amount of money and has to work within that budget. And then as revenues increase or decrease, we increase and decrease those budgets proportionately. that's going to better inform that portion of the discussion. So there's a number of these things sort of in process administratively right now. And I'm sorry, just a little bit early to be able to give you specifics on how that might play out. But we can guarantee that you will have much more information about our capital projects needs, and we'll be able to make a decision on how to prioritize and move those projects forward into the next few budgets.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. I'm very encouraged by that. Getting back to Lance, I guess, in terms of this issue of tabling the motion, I wanted to ask if that would, if we table it till February or March when we look at the entire capital improvements plan, if that would cause any problems.
City Engineer?
Mr. President, Alderman Padraguli would for sure delay any construction till 2020. So we'd be able to start design this year if the project did move ahead in the, say, March, we get the green light, because we have to advertise for engineering, select an engineer, approve the engineer, negotiate contracts, and then start the work. So it would be probably August, maybe July, before we would start actually designing the wall. Which is fine. It just pushes the schedule out. That's not a big deal.
Would there be any risk in terms of the extent that you can forecast this to the structure if we started one more construction season out like you're talking?
Mr. President, Alderman Padraguli, I guess as time goes on,
Sooner the better.
Things can happen. It's hard to predict those sort of things, but as time goes on, the risk does grow. Does it grow substantially? Probably not within the next year or two, but after that, I would say the risk goes up quite a bit.
Thank you.
Alderman Straight?
Thank you, Chairman Janser. Lance, would we be looking at walls 3, 4, and 5 then, say, in the 2020 budget?
Mr. President, Alderman Straight, the other retaining walls aren't showing as much degradation in age as walls 1 and 2. They're in the worst shape. And they are the tallest and steepest walls that we have. So we do have more time on those. I don't foresee doing those in the next 5 years.
Okay.
The ones we need to take care of are walls 1 and 2.
Okay. Thanks, Lance. Okay. Alderman Pittner?
Just a quick question for maybe city manager. With these funds, are these funds that will be available if we do delay this? There's no risk of this funding source not being available, correct?
That's correct. This funding source will still be available to us.
Okay. And then, so follow with Lance, if I may, President Janser. So if we table this until February, if we don't table this till February, you could see groundbreaking on this estimated this coming construction season in 2019?
Mr. President, Alderman Pittner, if council approves us to go out for RFQs at the Monday meeting, then that next week we'd send out all the legal ad paperwork, have an engineer on board likely in March to April. It's probably a 3-month engineering process. Depending on what the recommendation is from the engineer, it may be advantageous for us to do some of this construction in the wintertime. It may not. We don't know that until we get into some of that design. So we would have a shot at doing some construction in 19 if we moved ahead now. Just because of timelines, if we waited till spring, which is fine, I don't think we would be able to do that. I just see a lot of risk if we start a project right in the dead of winter instead of maybe in late fall.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So the motion on the floor is to table this until sometime in spring or until we deal with the rest of the capital improvement project things.
I would say at the same time. Yeah.
Doing it all together. Any further discussion? Okay, call the roll.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
No.
Janser?
No.
Pittner?
Yes.
Padragula?
No.
Straight?
Yes. Motion fails. Now we're back to the original motion, which is to proceed with the bid. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Any discussion? Call the roll.
Pittner?
No.
Padragula?
No.
Straight,
No.
Wolski,
No.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser.
Yes. Okay, so that failed. Is there anyone who wishes to make another motion on this item? City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. President. You can attempt to make another motion, different from the two that have been suggested, or you can refer this to the City Council without a recommendation. Those are options available to the council at this time.
Okay. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just make a motion then, seeing as how the vote has gone, that we defer this until the capital improvement projects included in our capital improvement project plans and make a decision at that time.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none? Oh, I guess there is some. Alderman Padre.
Thank you. I just share my ambivalence about this. I think the point that Alderman Walski is making is a very important one. And I'm very pleased in terms of what the city manager is telling us about a more robust planning process. I do think this wall, or at least the first two parts of it, really need to be built, and that's what I'm stuck with. The other three parts, I have no problems delaying on, and maybe we can come up with some more creative solutions like grass. I live on a hill myself, which is as steep as this hill, almost as steep as some of the hills here involved, and grass seems to do fine. So, I guess my thought would be to go ahead with the first two and, wait on the others and look for more creative solution and also let the process go on. I think the mayor's motion probably is the best compromise. We also have a member of the panel missing here tonight. I'm not sure what her thoughts would be, but I think it's kind of goes both ways. It's a pretty close vote here. So I'm thinking it through.
Further discussion, Alderman Pittner.
I guess just after the discussion, I don't see really any threat to this project by gathering more information in February. I think that's what we're here to do, is make decisions with as much information as possible. And if we have more information coming in February that came into light from this discussion, I think it's appropriate to table it until that time.
You convinced me.
Further discussion.
Just clarification of the motion.
Clarification is to address it in the capital improvements plan come February or whenever that is complete, in the order of which it is provided within that plan.
Okay. Alderman Straight.
I guess, Chairman Janser, moving forward, when we get into that aspect of capital improvements, I'd like to include the conversation about Hub City funding, because I think in how we prioritize how we're going to spend that money in is also important to me. And I don't like the idea of spending Hub City funding on improvements for us around our building. I don't know. There's something about that just doesn't seem right for me. I'd like to spend it on larger areas but it's just my point of contention, I guess, right now. So thank you, sir.
Okay. Any further comments? Seeing none, we'll vote. Call the roll.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski.
Yes.
Okay, that motion is carried. That concludes item number 12. 13 was passed on consent. We are on to number 14, which is a selection of engineer for the St. Anne Street Bridge analysis. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Straight.
Second.
Seconded by Wolski. Discussion. I'm not sure who pulled this. Alderman Wolski, did you pull it?
Finding my notes here, President Janser. Yeah. Simply a request. Lance, as we provided this project is successful, as we advance it, I would just ask that you request that our consultant review the historic structure of the bridge and the consequences that may have on any of the decisions we make. I imagine in some of the conversations I've had with folks at the State Historic Preservation Office, sometimes a registered contributing landmark like the bridge has special exceptions for things like the ADA. So I just want to make sure that we're evaluating all our options.
Mr. President, Alderman Wolski, that was always in the scope.
Great.
Okay. Lance, can you identify for me where the funds are coming from for this particular project?
Mr. President, these are CDBG DR funds from allocation 2.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll vote. Call the roll, please.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula.
Yes.
Motion carried. Item 15 is the retail liquor and beer license transfer. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Wolski,
Second.
second by Straight. Discussion. Alderman Wolski, you had something on this?
President Janser, yeah, this is obviously related to a transfer last month that came from the Utter Place license to the new ACES or Ice Time LLC license, and now the license that was previously in the Blind Duck is being transferred back to this party. I simply wanted to make sure that on this particular license, we have a noted date of inactivity. And I would assume it's sometime between last month and this month, because on that last license that we transferred, there was a bit of a gray area. So I'm just curious to know that we have a date certain on when that is.
Mr. President, Alderman Wolski, the last day of business was actually October 31st. So November 1 would have been the target date, is I believe what you're asking.
The date of inactivity, which is correct. That's
Yes, sir.
Just wanted to have that, to know where that was at.
Okay, and sir, thank you for standing up. Can we get your name for the record? I'm assuming you're either the applicant or the...
Gary Huber.
Okay, thank you, Gary. All right, very good. Any further discussion? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Seeing none, call the roll.
Wolski,
Yes.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight.
Yes.
That motion is carried. Item number 16 is the Minot Environmental Policy Group recommendations regarding single-use plastic shopping bags. And I think we have some folks here in the audience regarding that issue. Would you like to speak to the council about that?
President Janser and members of the council, my name is Tim Bauman and I live here in Minot. I've lived here since 2013. Just want to say thank you for considering the recommendation of the Minot Environmental Policy Group. In the document that we sent last week through the city clerk, we kind of outlined what the Minot Environmental Policy Group is, who we are, and what our goal in this activity and action was. So we started in February 2018. We are 6 residents of Minot who have a variety of roles that we play here in the community, but we got together and wanted to talk a little bit more about policy, not just our individual actions or individual business actions, but looking at our community as a whole and the way that we interact with our environment for better and for worse. One of the things that we wanted to talk about, obviously, is recycling, but that is a topic that has been kind of slowly churning through the process of hopefully moving forward. And so another thing that we talked about was single-use plastic shopping bags. So why we chose to do that is because single-use plastics has become a very hot topic the world over, and it is something that has become very, very important for kind of the feedback loop for what our environment is telling us and how we interact with our environment. So it's also something that has been very widespread in terms of other communities across the country and the globe have implemented various policies to encourage people to reduce their use of single-use plastics, and in this case, single-use plastic shopping bags. So our goal was to come up with some recommendations, 3 tiers of recommendations for our community. The first was for individuals, and again, this is all in the document that you received, talking about how we as individual people and families and business, or people and families can make an impact in reducing that waste. Secondly, we made recommendations to retailers in the Minot community as to ways that they could reduce their impact through single-use plastic shopping bags. And then finally, our goal was to give a recommendation to the Minot City Council as to what we could do as a community. Being the people that we are, we wanted to make sure that we were not just making a junk recommendation or a recommendation that considered non-starters. And so we did meet with city administration just to talk through things and make sure that our recommendation would not again, be a non-starter. And in doing so, we were asked to present a sample ordinance of what that would look like if our recommendations were to take effect here in Minot. So as you look at the document, Appendix A includes 21 public comments that we received during a public comment period in the months of June and July here in Minot. Appendix B is a letter that was sent to retailers to solicit their input. To date, we have only had feedback from one retailer. It was a small independent retailer, and that was submitted as part of the 21 public comments that we received in June and July. We have not received any comment from any large big box retailers or national chains that are located here in Minot. Appendix number C is a sample draft of some financial scenarios of single-use plastic bag fees, and there's several different ways you can read it. Basically, it says if we assume 50,000 single-use plastic bags are consumed a day in Minot, what would it look like if we had a 5-cent fee on that? What would it look like with a 30, a 50, a 75, and a 90% reduction in consumption? And finally, Appendix D is the sample ordinance that we were asked to submit along with this recommendation. All of those things, again, are available in the document that you were sent, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Bauman? Alderman Wolski.
President Janser, thank you. Mr. Bauman, thank you for standing up and speaking passionately and articulately for this effort. I think the template you have set here in terms of how to go about influencing your local government is a very good one, and I hope folks paying attention in the audience and on our online forums are taking note of the manner in which you've gone about this. On the whole, my comments for my fellow aldermen are that I think there is a unacknowledged cost associated with single-use plastic, whether it's plastic bags, whether it's lids on coffee cups, whether it's straws. These items are there's a social cost in terms of the aesthetic in our community, and there's an environmental cost. On that second part, I can speak from my own experience in terms of the cleanups we've operated for the Friends of the Souris River over the last few years. One anecdote that comes to mind is an occasion on the bank of the river down by Roosevelt Park where I went down to pick up a plastic bag. I got that one. Underneath it, there was another plastic bag. Once I got that one, there was another plastic bag underneath that. In literally the same 1 square foot of the banks of our river, there were 3 plastic bags sitting on top of each other. So I do think this is a significant problem that needs to be addressed in some form. I appreciate the template that you've offered here forward. I would welcome hearing the other aldermen's thoughts and manner in which we might, at the very least, advance this in some form for further conversation.
Okay, Alderman Padragula, and I guess since we don't have a motion at this point, I guess if we could perhaps ask questions of Mr. Bauman and kind of get that taken care of, and then we can, if somebody wishes to make a motion, we could discuss that. Alderman Padragula, do you have a question, or were you going to make a motion, or?
President Janser, thank you. Mr. Bauman, thank you for standing up and speaking
Yes. I just wanted, before I did that, I wanted to clarify. We're having a report come back from the consultants in the landfill area regarding recycling. If I remember correctly, yesterday we were told to be available probably next month. Is that correct?
We're getting yes nods from Jason Sorensen from Public Works, so I guess the answer is yes.
Okay. I guess my thought would be to bring this up as part of that discussion at that time with the whole picture laid out in front of us. So I would move that we consider this at the time we receive that report.
Okay. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Alderman Wolski. Alderman Potter-Gillen.
I wanted to make some comments here. I think, first of all, I wanted to compliment you, Mr. Bauman, and your group. Like Alderman Wolski said, I think this is an excellent example of citizen advocacy. And instead of just complaining about something or criticizing some branch of government, I think you've worked together, come up with a good analysis of the situation and some very positive options to consider. So I'm really very impressed, particularly with the tone and the manner and the process of which you've gone about your work. Second comment I'd make is that I think generally we need to be much more attentive to environmental kinds of issues. I think as the world gets crazier, we need to pay more attention to this kind of stuff, and I think it'll be more relevant. Maybe 10, 20 years ago, there were just few people who were thinking in this direction. I think more and more people are realizing this is really critical. So I think some of the inertia we had in the past, I think, is being overcome by the press of events. Third comment I would make is that I think this issue of plastic bags should be discussed as part of the more general topic of recycling and waste management. I think we need to coordinate these kinds of activities with other forms of government, like especially the school system and probably other municipalities. I personally am not sure that at this time moving with this particular issue of plastic bags makes the most sense. And the reason I say that is because the information you've given me and as a result of my reading suggests that there are pros and cons. And I wonder if this is the best place to start. I think, for example, in many communities they have recycling of cans and bottles. People are charged deposits for them. So I think there are a whole bunch of issues here that would be really best to consider all at once. And since we have a report that will be coming from consultants, which I think is most relevant to the landfill and that aspect of recycling, I think it'd be best to consider this as a package, really. So what I would suggest is that we really look at this very carefully, but we look at it as part of a larger whole. I think there are competing interests here. Aesthetically, oh God, they're awful. But, some of the things I've read suggest that if we're looking at saving energy, that really they consume much more energy or less energy than trees do in paper bags. So it's a whole complex thing. It's all interrelated, and I think we have to have a better sense of our priorities as a community. I think there are a couple aldermen here who are very concerned about the aesthetics, particularly of the river areas. I'm concerned about those too. So I think we need to look at this in a broader picture. Right now, I can't support it, but I think it should be part of that broader look. And what I'm looking at, or what I want to look at, is where are the best places to start? Where are the best places to get people to start thinking about the consequences of their actions, and do that in a way that preserves as much initiative and freedom for people as possible, and also gets the most return, if you will, in terms of our shared priorities as a community. So I think this is an excellent idea, but I think considering bags by themselves at this point is premature in isolation. So what I'm suggesting is we put bags, on the agenda when we talk about the broader picture, and then start making some decisions as to which areas we prioritize.
Okay. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, Mr. Bauman, I greatly appreciate you stepping forward in the manner that you did. As Alderman Wolski had pointed out, it takes a lot not only to bring an issue forward, but to, I think, put together the work and the ideas that you have done. Very impressed with that. There's some information that is missing out of there that I'm a little bit concerned about, and that's very much, I think, with a lot of the different tasks that are brought before us on a number of occasions, and that is in the terms of the actual total cost for a project like this to the taxpayers. and some of the different pieces that you had outlined where certain costs would go to the retailers to recoup some of that cost would go to the city for specific uses. But my concern actually more so is on the enforcement. It kind of goes back to some of the laws that we've seen that have been passed or ordinances. What is that cost of enforcement? We already have limited, I think, availability of law enforcement for specific serious issues, and then a limited ability for our ordinance enforcement officer. So that's one of those areas that we would have to, I think, greater define before we really dive deep into this to find out what the appetite of the community is. And then there were some numbers, the 6 members of your committee, the 21 comments that were gathered, the 1 retailer that responded. There's 48,000 other folks out there. And I would put this on your shoulders to move forward diligently. That you have a lot of work ahead of you, and I think you can appreciate that going down the road that you are, that it is a mindset change. I'm not a big fan of the one-use plastic bags at all, and just after this issue has come to light a little bit, in the very short while, there has been a tremendous outpouring of people that are just having a tough time wrapping their hands around it because of the cost and because of things like that. So I think my question is moving forward, as Alderman Padrigula had said, is what's your next step to get, I think, the community behind it? Because that is a heavy lift. And I really hope that you guys have a plan to task that more so than just saying ordinance, heavy-handed government, let's change this at the top. But how do you socially change that?
That is a great question, and I wish I knew the concrete answer as to how that happens. Within the last year, there has been a Facebook group that has now 246 members called Environmentally Minded People of Minot. It's a safe space for people to just talk about things, to ask questions about recycling, about how our city functions, about how we can function within the constructs of our community, and make sure that we're not contributing to further environmental degradation or even contributing to something that could build our community up. Education is a really big part of that group. There are bi-weekly posts just talking about how you, obviously how you do things within our community, but also just awareness of how our actions do impact other things. So that's been something that has been ongoing, and it's been a rewarding process to be a part of and to see how that has come to light, and how, again, if you asked me a year and a half ago, I never would have said that there were 246 environmentally self-named people within our community, but there are, and there's even more out there as this topic has come to light. Long answer short, I don't know how we do that other than just continually being aware of our actions. We're very pleased with the amount of discussion and conversation that has started, both opposed to the ordinance language that was in the recommendation we passed on to you, and in support of the ordinance language that was passed along to you. And I think that there has been a lot of education that's been happening there. Again, via social media, I will claim my moniker of being a millennial, answering questions today when people ask about how does it work when you have to pay for a bag at self-checkout, and being able to tell people when we have used self-checkout in a community that does have a 5-cent or 10-cent bag fee. It's usually just self-reported, very similar to what Target does today when you bring your own bag and they give you a 5-cent credit. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen with our community, and our plan as a group of 6 for the Minot Environmental Policy Group is obviously to continue working forward, but then I think as a community and as a whole, we all need to be educating and teaching one another to move in that direction.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have a motion on the floor to table this until, or to set this back until we discuss the report on the environment, or on the recycling. So Alderman Straight, do you have a further comment on that?
I just wanted to ask a couple questions, if I may.
Certainly.
Thank you. Mr. Baumann, I appreciate your work. Clearly, I'm in your camp, and I don't think that's going to surprise anybody. I'm curious, has your group done any organizing data collection on, you said Target would give you a discount on your receipt. I'm well aware that Marketplace gives you money back if you bring your own bags. Do we have any idea of how many retailers out there are willing to offer such a discount, if you will?
We have our just anecdotal, experiential information that people are willing to share. Again, one of the disappointments that we felt as a group was the fact that our large retailers and national chains that do have experience operating within communities where a fee or a ban for plastic bags is in place, they did not come to the table. And being a group of citizens, and someone who manages an organization myself, I don't know that I necessarily blame them, because sometimes you can open a can of worms by getting into something that you don't have to, and you may have a corporate policy or a company policy that prevents you from talking or engaging in that particular topic. But I think that is the missing piece, and something that moving forward we would love to have that information.
If I could continue, Chairman Janser, I wonder, Mr. Baumann, if there's a discussion kind of within your group to go back to the existing retailers and say, hey, one, I'm always curious why they don't promote it, because they're clearly paying, they have that cost, right? So would they consider, from marketplace's standpoint, going 5 cents to 6 cents or something like that? And I'm curious if your group has considered asking for that instead of asking this body for a tax, if you will, because this is how it's interpreted. Mm-hmm. And this is how people call us, is like, hey, my property taxes are high already, Shannon. Hey, now you're going to tax me at the grocery store. I'm wondering if you've considered that at all.
We have. At this point, we had not really felt that it was appropriate for us to approach them directly, but moving forward, we would be happy to do so.
Okay. Alderman Wolski.
President Janser, thank you. A couple things that maybe can take place between now and next month. Mr. Berry, I don't know. Perhaps you can speak to your experience. The northwest part of the country, where you were formerly from, has been quicker to adopt some of these policies than we here in North Dakota have. So I don't know if we have the ability to perform a rough feasibility of your expectations in terms of cost of implementing some of this. Again, some more information from our internal operation to help inform the conversation. And then, as I hear Mr. Baumann suggesting he's had a little bit of trouble getting a response from some of the larger retailers, I wonder if a city letterhead might improve the response rate. I don't see myself in the near future supporting anything as draconian as a ban or anything like that. That is not something I see. But I would like to invite those larger retailers to the table, and I wonder if we might be able to use our pulpit to invite that conversation.
City Manager, do you have a comment?
I don't know if I do have a comment, actually,
Okay.
but everyone was looking at me, so
okay. Well, I guess
you have to hit the microphone.
Yeah. Okay. Alderman Padregula.
I was thinking more on the lines of, I wouldn't say coalition, but maybe a prod from the council or the mayor specifically. I think everybody's interests are coinciding. I mean, these companies are giving away a ton of materials, literally and figuratively. And, I think they have some expertise. They work in different markets and different jurisdictions. I'd be very curious to see. I'd like to see them on board. This is a major cost for them. It was intriguing to find that out, how expensive these bags are. I think maybe if we look at working together and going to them and asking for their expertise, what's it like if you're a big retailer in a community? I mean, I certainly don't want to ban these things either, and I'm just trying to figure out what the best way to try to reduce this is. I think they have some expertise that might be of value to us. Again, I think this might be a win-win kind of thing. What I also see as a broader issue, I think, is we're increasingly as a council and as a community looking at being honest about the true costs of things. The bag is free, but it's not, because it costs the retailer how much?
The Googleable number is an assumption is about a penny a bag.
Right. It costs money to clean them up from the dead loops in the river. It costs people aggravation and cleaning up time to climb up a tree and drag them down. And I think that same discussion we had with free parking downtown. I mean, it's very attractive. I mean, you have to pay money at the ramp, but parking on the street isn't free. And that's, I see that as a broader theme in many of these discussions we've been having lately, is that maybe we need to be more candid about what things really cost, and then we can make decisions about how we pay for them. But this notion that the things somehow happen for free, I think is a very suspect notion, and this is a good example of that. And I think that's where there might be a commonality of interests. So I think this can be pursued further and fits in with some broader themes.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Alderman Patagula, as well. With this one, and I don't want to seem disingenuous, but I am very hesitant to fire off an ad hoc committee on plastic bags or a cost of, as we saw where
and I'm not asking for
favorite
that.
ad hoc committees went in the past. We have some heavy lifts ahead of us. However, that being said, that is not a deterrence whatsoever to not continue your work as we are looking towards the future with recycling. And the plastic bags within the bulk recycling is an issue. And that very well can be addressed within that same context at that time. So if it were my direction to encourage you to continue to gather information, continue to bring those conversations to the retailers so that when the recycling conversation starts down the road again, we can work with as much real information as we can. So, thank you.
Okay, so the motion on the floor is to defer this item until we discuss the recycling report. Any further discussion on the motion? Alderman Straight.
I guess Chairman Janser and Mr. Mayor, I'd be more than willing to visit with Mr. Bauman a little more and kind of serve as the kind of initial liaison as we, he gathers information, share that back with you. And if, Mr. Bauman, if you feel that's something that's necessary, I'd be more than happy to, serve in that capacity, just so we don't have an ad hoc committee, sir. But we continue to hear from Mr. Bauman and further information back to the council if that's agreeable within your motion.
I don't have a problem with that as long as it is it's on your own prerogative and work schedule. Absolutely.
Gotcha.
Okay. Okay. Very well. We will, I think, conclude the discussion at this point then, and I think we've had a good good presentation and a good discussion, so I thank you all for that. So again, the motion is to defer this item and consider it at the time of the recycling report, which we expect sometime in a February-ish kind of time frame. Call the roll, please.
Padrigula?
Yes.
Straight?
Yes.
Wolski?
Yes.
Sitma?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
That motion is carried. Item number 17 is the amendment of the Magic Fund General Policy Guidelines.
Move for approval.
Moved by the mayor,
Second.
by Alderman Padrigula. Is there any discussion? Alderman Wolski.
President Janser, appreciate the hard work that's gone into this. I'm not going to support this motion tonight. I just don't think this document is ready to go, and it mostly comes from the fact that I had a lot of difficulty reading it. It's just it's a little too rough for my consumption, and I think in a document like this that is so critical in providing guidance to a valuable resource, I want it easy to understand. I want it clear. I want everything articulated to a little bit of a larger degree, and I don't think it's there yet. So I would prefer to hold this one and send the committee back to work. Maybe use this opportunity for council to provide input on what's before us in terms of shaping the larger document.
Further discussion. Alderman Padrigula.
Two comments. First of all, Mr. Zakian is absent here, and I think he's been a significant part of the process here, and I have some technical questions to ask him. I think we should move forward with it, but I make that contingent upon getting certain answers. The second thing is we have several members of this committee on the DS here, and I just wanted to ask them for a quick update as to how this occurred. I mean, to me, it seems like it's a product of many months of work, and I'm not quite sure what more there is out there, and I'd like to hear what you guys have done.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Essentially, what this boiled down to is taking a look at the verbiage of what was in existence, and then essentially going out to a vast majority of different programs that mirror the MADC with the Magic Fund, and the language that exists out there time and time again, and mirroring it with what is in existence. Certainly, we had members of the Chamber of Commerce, MADC board members, the MADC director, and many other people, and there was quite a bit of back and forth in going through, essentially making it more clear to what the function of the Magic Fund essentially is, who the process to go through the application, and then specifically the process to which it follows. I think Mr. Zakin could probably more eloquently go through the verbiage in its entirety as to the reason why, but going through line by line, it is very much similar to what's in existence out there for the application process for an economic development tool such as the Magic Fund.
Just to kind of respond as well, so the mayor and I and Mr. Zakian, of course, and the city finance director were part of the committee that did this work, along with the other folks that the mayor mentioned a minute ago. And so in some cases, in looking at the previous guidelines, there were places where we thought that it would be important to add some additional flexibility so that the council and the Magic Fund Screening Committee would have perhaps additional flexibility in some areas. And those are reflected in the new draft. And then in other cases, just to tighten up some language and some definitions that were either inconsistent in the old document, or we thought we could do better with some language that other people were using around the state or around the country. So those were essentially the kinds of things that we were engaged in. And there was an amount of discussion over, some of the terms and some of the ways that things were stated that kind of got us to this final draft.
Am I correct in understanding that this essentially opens up the Magic Fund and perhaps conceives of it as a tool to use to grow local businesses rather than bring in big primary sector businesses, as always it has been focused on?
I think there's partly an answer to that, and I see our finance director coming forward, so I'll let him weigh in at this point on that question.
Mr. President, Alderman Padragula, Mr. Zakian was the one spearheading this, but one of the things that was discussed during our budget process when we were, doing some of the reallocation of the sales tax funds, and there hasn't been a lot of Magic Fund activity for the last few years. And some of the issue with that is because there are certain constraints that are placed on that money, and primarily the primary sector jobs and some of the definitions that are included in that. The council, I think, was looking at different ways that they can expand the economic development activities in our community without just those primary sector jobs. And some of the language change in here allows for the establishment of a revolving loan fund. Now, there's still a lot of work that has to go, that we have to go through to get that all in place and established and, all put together before that can actually happen. But the framework is there to be able to access some of that funding to capitalize this revolving loan fund that would then be available for other types of incentive activities for small businesses or expansions, or maybe matching funds for Bank of North Dakota PACE loans or flex pace or other types of funding that's available out there.
Mr. Lakefield is exactly right. And one of the things that we discovered in talking about this is that, there are some grantors of monies that require a local match. So one of the concerns was that we have the ability with the Magic Fund to potentially provide that local match for the kinds of small business revolving loan funds that David was referring to. Alderman Straight.
May I ask Dave or City Manager, when is Mr. Zakian going to be back? Is he going to be here for Monday's meeting?
He will be here for Monday's meeting.
Okay. I guess my second or follow-up is just this conversation of revolving loan fund. Is that strictly just a revolving loan fund? Because I know that at Service Basin Planning, we're talking, or they are talking about an interest buy-down program. So are these one and the same, similar type of program, something completely different? Mr. Mayor, I see you there. So.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. President, thank you, Alderman Straight. It's a combination of accessing all of these different tools. The interest buy-down essentially is part of, for instance, like the PACE Flex program or the PACE program that is offered through the Bank of North Dakota. This could be some of those leverage dollars for a portion of that within the language to be able to access those interest buy-downs. So it's essentially, with those conversations through the Bank of North Dakota, through the Service Basin Planning Council, the Magic Fund, there's a significant amount of tools that are available out there in many other communities right now. We have been short access to many of those tools because of whatever circumstances you want to put out there. But this does offer, to a very short answer to Steve's question, yes, it does offer up a portion of that for existing business to, I think, get some leverage to those PACE Flex programs that aren't necessarily that primary sector, which is MADC's primary, but does broaden up the leverage options for the community.
Alderman Patergula, or I'm sorry, Alderman Straight, did you have a continuation?
I'll save my comments, I guess, for Monday.
Okay. Alderman Patergula, did you have a comment?
Yes, I'm delighted to hear this. I mean, this is, I think, where we need to go personally. My only hesitance is this is a major, major change in how we do economic development in this community. And I just want to make sure the public and all of us on the dais here have a chance to think this through. The Magic Fund has been a source of great progress and also great controversy in our community for a couple decades minimum. And I just want to make sure people understand this is a major change. It's a change I support, I strongly support, but it's a significant change. And I just want to make sure we have a chance to look through it. And I think I have three questions, to ask John when he comes back. But I'm very intrigued by this, and I'm going to vote to pass it along to the council on Monday. But I think people need to know that this is a significant change.
Well, I would agree that there has been and we talked about this at length, there has been a gap in some of our ability to support existing businesses, to support small businesses. However, the way the document reads is that there is a limit to the portion of the Magic Fund that would be available for that purpose. So the primary sector focus is still very much in the majority of what the Magic Fund would be about. But it does open the door and provide some ability to deal with the other portion that we have not used it for previously. So, that's kind of the caveat. Alderman Wolski.
President Janser, thanks. I am not going to be supporting this tonight, but it's not because I don't support the intent of what's going on here. I appreciate the hard work that's gone into it. There's one other element for me that gives me pause, which is the fact that we have tasked Mr. Mahalik and a number of action groups to look at the finding inside the IEDC report, and we haven't seen that yet. And so I think there's at least the potential of having the cart in front of the horse here, because some of these groups might bring back some other really valid points to consider in terms of how we apply the Magic Fund. And I've just noticed a tendency that at times when we settle these issues, we set them down for quite some time. And so, you know, everything we have, it's always a living document, but our tendency to not revisit this, like I said, I just think the timing of this might be appropriate if we hold it for a little longer until the IEDC findings are in and those particular plans are set in motion as well.
Further discussion? Seeing none, Alderman Patergula.
Question. I'm taken by what Alderman Walski's saying here. Is anybody aware of anything that's going on with these groups that in any way would go against this, that would suggest this is a mistake, or would we be putting something down that really we're getting some hint of might not be a good idea?
Alderman Walski.
I've been sitting in a lot of meetings, and I would say no. The only thing that I might suggest is that there might be other ideas or options that might want to be included. You know, if I think it's the potential that maybe the scope of the Magic Fund might want to be larger than what we're looking at here, ultimately in some form. But again, we don't have that information yet, and so it's I'm uncomfortable approving this without that piece of the puzzle at this point.
Further discussion? Alderman Straight.
I guess Chairman Janser and to Alderman Patergula, I sit on one of the subcommittees that is kind of an entrepreneurial toolkit, and just looking at resources available within the community, what we have, what isn't being communicated. I think that we could do obviously better where I want to see this one piece of overlap. So there's many options available for many different types of businesses. I could get deep in the weeds here. I don't think anybody in the audience wants to hear us get deep in the weeds on it, but I can appreciate Alderman Walski's point. I think we have to get through some of that work and then come back. I know there's also, you know, the discussion, the other committee that I sit on is incubator, working with Minot State, young businesses starting out, you know, so I think there's a role, because that's obviously the spirit and the economic engine of a lot of communities is small businesses. And I think that you could argue that as much as I want to see that we're going to focus our energy from the Magic Fund on possible business expansion and retention, I think that the public is also going to have a concern of, does MADC have the staff available to move a larger portion, a larger mission forward? We've had some great staff there that have kind of maybe got us through some incredibly tough times, but I think that's part of the conversation piece. And so just to kind of speak at that, where I'm not sitting here seeming like I don't know anything, but that's how I think we look at the stew and the toolkit that's being created. It's just a matter of how we go about these things, is where we differ.
I would comment, I think all these are good comments. My thought is, however, having served on this committee, many of those things, you know, were brought up. And I think we've done a decent job of getting to where we are with this document that's presented. That said, as we progress and evolve our economic development in the community, these are living documents. And if, you know, the stakeholders folks come back and say, hey, here's a way that this can be improved and that we can, you know, go forward on a better basis, either by expanding the role of the Magic Fund or whatever, we have the ability to do that. The City Council has the ability to amend this at need. And so while I understand some who would maybe desire to try to, wait for the next thing like that. I don't think it's necessary at this point. I think we can move on this, and if we need to change it as we go forward, we're certainly able to do that. Any further discussion? Let's vote. Call the roll, please.
Sitma,
Yes.
Janser,
Yes.
Pittner,
Yes.
Padragula,
Yes.
Straight,
Yes.
Wolski.
Nope. Okay, that takes care of item 17. That motion was passed. We are on to item 18. Mr. Lakefield is coming to tell us about the parking ramps.
Mr. President, members of the council, I'll be brief. I just wanted to give you a little update on some of the progress we've made with the parking ramps recently. I have had Barb McPeak from the police department run a report for me earlier today, starting in May 1st through today, so just a couple of days short of 6 months. The police department has received 186 calls for service down at the parking ramps. And at first glance, it seems like a lot of calls in 6 months. However, there's a lot of different things that are documented in there, and I'll go through that in just a little bit. About 17 of those calls were for assistance for problems with equipment or getting in or out of the ramps. Around 145 of those calls documented were for extra patrol, and it was just where the officers were going through and patrolling through the parking ramps in the middle of the night or sometime during the day just to check on everything in the ramps. So, and the rest of them were a smattering of different things, traffic accidents, a traffic stop outside that just happened to use that address, and at least one incidence of a moose being in the parking ramp. So just a little update there. Most recently, we had an issue that gained some attention about a person being stuck in the parking ramp and not being able to get out. We were able to do a little bit of research on that issue and discovered that the underlying problem was that the person had been in there beyond the time allowed by their parking pass. And so this particular case, we were able to speak with her, do a little bit more investigation as to the underlying cause, and work this problem backwards to come up with a more viable solution to prevent this in the future. And I'm happy to report to you that we were able to work with the Mono McGann and get some of the programming changed with the equipment in the parking structures so that now if someone were to stay past there, that the only option is not to be stuck there until the police or fire department comes and lets you out. And also as a result of that, we've improved our processes. Kevin Sickler, our property maintenance superintendent, has made sure that all of the police and fire vehicles have access to the gate cabinets at the ramps. They have laminated cards with some of the instructions on how to clear the errors or open the gates. There's passcodes and keys inside of those cabinets, so they're a lot more readily accessible. We've also added access for the dispatchers down at the police department, so they are now able to log in on a web browser and access the software for the ramps. So in a lot of cases, if they have a call for assistance, they're able to open those arms from the dispatch center without actually having to send someone out. And that doesn't always work in every case, but we have been able to use that here recently in a couple of instances. And we've also Barb McPeak at the police department has prepared a nice little instruction card for all the dispatchers to have and shared it with our utility billing gals. Whoever's taking these calls for service are coming in, they're getting a lot more information that helps us troubleshoot the problems. Some of the past incidences, if someone had trouble, we would send somebody down there and let them out. We'd find out about it the next day, but we didn't have any idea. We may have the caller's name, but that may not be the name that's on the cards. We didn't know whose card it was. And it made it very difficult for us to actually troubleshoot that. We would go down to the parking ramps, everything would seem to be just fine, and we couldn't recreate the problem. So this process has allowed us to dig back into some of these incidences and track down some of the underlying cause. And it looks like the overwhelming cause of some of these issues is essentially operator error. not operating the ramps correctly or overstaying the terms on their pass. And to move on, some other things that we're working on, just getting on a routine maintenance schedule, trying to go through there and keep up on all those readers and blow the dust out, all of that type of thing to helpfully avoid some of the problems. We have had an issue with one of the ticket readers a couple of times in the last week. So we're looking at our option there is to either order a brand new one or send this one in for repair. It could be several weeks. So we're looking at the option of getting one replacement module that we can cycle through, and we can use that then to do our routine maintenance where we can bring that unit, swap it out, take that one back to the shop, get it cleaned up, have it ready to go, and then swap that out with the next one and keep going through. So we have a routine maintenance program going on with those. The property maintenance people check on those ramps every day during the week. They go down there right away in the morning to make sure nothing's been damaged, nothing needs to be system down there. Again, that would help protect the property, a little more security, and then help us to diagnose any issues that might be going on. For example, dispatch, if they had access to that, could actually see the camera or see the gates coming in or out and help identify some problems. I do try to use the ramps downtown as much as possible just to make sure that they work. I was down there earlier today, and it seems like there are a number of people using the ramps. You can tell the ones that have been in there overnight because today they weren't covered with ice and snow and all kinds of garbage from sitting outside. So it's nice to see that, and it does seem that the usage is picking up a little bit. I want to go through some pictures here really quickly. These first few pictures were taken last March before the city took over the operation of the ramps. And I'm just going to go through this. This was after we had some snow, a day or two after the fact. They hadn't been cleaned up. Oh. Derek, it's not letting me go forward.
Not so easy, is it?
All right, here we go. So this is just a picture in the alley with the snow piled up. Some of the pictures of the interior with some of the stuff laying around. Now this was a picture that I took this morning when I was down there. This was a little after 9 o'clock. The sidewalks had been shoveled all the way around. Ice melt was down there. The sidewalks were in relatively good condition. This is a picture of one of the entrances actually coming out of the alley, I believe this one was. This is one of the neighboring properties just across the alley going the other direction, looking the other direction to the west in front of the parking ramp. One of the properties across the street, directly across the street from the parking ramp, sidewalks, and a couple of more interior shots with the vehicles. So I'm proud to report that even though we've had some publicity recently, we have taken a number of steps to improve this. We continue to work to improve this. I think we've made great strides in cleaning these ramps up, and hopefully we'll continue to move forward and make this even better product.
Okay, any questions for Mr. Lakefield, Alderman Wolski?
Just a brief comment here, Dave. Thank you for the presentation. I am downtown on a regular basis. I also walk through and wander through and just observe what's going on down there. And there's been a noticeably improved care standard, cleanliness, all of the above. So thank you to our public works people and everybody who's contributing to improving the circumstances around how these are cared for and operated.
And Mr. Jonason's the director of that department, and Kevin Sickler's the superintendent, and they have been doing a great job. And it's their entire crew. The City Hall staff goes down there, and they make sure that the ice melt is out and the sidewalks are shoveled, and they're really working to take care of that place. So.
Alderman Straight.
Dave, we appreciate you paying for parking, going down to check it out, so thanks for that. I guess I'm curious, Mr. Barry, are we looking at a long-term, some of those interior rooms that were maybe designated for retail, are we looking maybe down the road where Chief Olson and the police might have a small little office presence in and around downtown, kind of, especially in the summer months, bike patrol, things of that nature, or is that would that help with some of the, concerns? Or I think it would be a nice, thing for the community to see the face of, our great PD kind of strolling around and maintaining, again, our infrastructure.
City Manager?
Thank you, Mr. President. Alderman Straight, the police department does a good job, particularly in the summer times, rolling through there on bikes and walking through on their patrols, and they're there in cars and whatnot quite frequently. The facility itself isn't really equipped for offices right now. It would require a major tenant improvement if they were to occupy one of the areas that we've talked about. Additionally, the situation we're in with Cypress is one where we want to be sensitive as it relates to how that building may get improved, depending upon the outcome of that suit. And so moving in that direction might not be prudent at this point in time until we have some finality with regard to some of the questions that are still outstanding in regard to that suit. But eventually, that may be an option that we could consider, some sort of remote post. We would want to look to the chief and his staff to do an analysis of the benefits of that, but certainly something that could be possible in the future for additional study.
Okay. Thank you. Alderman Potter-Gula.
I also wanted to join my two colleagues in offering praise to the city staff for trying to make the best out of a very challenging situation. I mean, the place looks cleaner. We're paying more attention to it. It's our property now. We're trying to maintain it at a decent level, and I'm pleased to see that, regardless of all the other issues that we're faced with. So I think we're trying to make the best out of a situation. That's good to see.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lakefield. And now, the much awaited, and I know that yesterday we saw like just a snippet of a slide, so we know this is going to be good.
Well, my coworkers have asked me not to get any closer than 5 feet of this machine here, so with that being said, I'll go ahead and get
City
the keyboard
Assessor is going to give us a report. Please proceed.
By law, we have to give you an annual report every April, and that's called the Board of Equalization, and that's when we talk about the business of real estate, where the numbers are, what's going on. You get a pretty in-depth report from our office, I think. And so I just want you to be aware that that is always posted for the public out on the website. And anybody can look at that. And that's the report that most of you saw last April. And in that report are a bunch of numbers regarding to where the assessments are going, what the numbers changed from last year, what we did with apartments and motels and graphs and all that interesting stuff. So anyhow, that's always available. You get that every year from us in April. This is intended to be more of a report just on where the assessor's office was at, where it's at now, and probably where it's going. We can get back to where we're. So we have, currently we're staffed with 6 full-time positions. This is just a little spread of our service time. I've got 29, and then we've got 21, 3 senior appraisers, 13, 6, 5 property assessment specialists with 4 years. If you look at this, it's actually a pretty good transition. There isn't a bunch of people with short time or long, so it's a pretty good little spread. To be an appraiser in our office, you're required to have a bachelor's degree. We do have one individual in our office who does not, and she is very interested in the tuition program opportunities that was passed by the City Council for next year. Class 1 assessors have to have certificates where we send them to 6 weeks of tested courses, and then of course we all have to go back for continuing ed to keep that up. Our staff level, I thought this might be of interest to you. Our staff level compared to the other major cities. Grand Forks has 16,000 parcels. When it works out to how many staff people they have, we can parcel that out, that each full-time staff person is responsible for 2,200 parcels. Bismarck, 2,700. You know, we have 3,250 parcels per full-time staff person. Fargo, about the same as us. That just kind of gives you an idea that we don't think we're overstaffed, and we think we're fine. We don't think we're understaffed either, but just a little metric there to look at. What are the assessor's duties? What are we responsible for? Well, it's our job to estimate true and full value on every parcel in the city, except government-owned buildings. If you call tomorrow and you say, what is the market value of the courthouse, we won't have that. Determine what property is taxable and what is exempt. Churches, charitable organizations are exempt. We follow state statute on that. If you're a senior citizen and you don't have enough money to pay your property taxes, or you make less than a certain amount, we have 440 homestead credit applications. 385 people are getting a veteran's disability. 180 people are getting an exemption for various other reasons, either because they're charitable or church. In addition to that, during the summer, we'll review all buildings and vacant parcels. We try to get around on a rotating basis. And I would like to show you one video, if I could. Derek, will I click on this, or I guess I will. This was a video that was produced by the Kansas Association of Assessing Officers, and we think we can get this for North Dakota. And it would be something for our website and all North Dakota assessors, and we think we can get it very reasonable.
So there's a lot of misunderstanding about the role of appraisers and how they affect the property tax that homeowners pay. Role of appraisers. When someone hears the term appraiser that homeowners seem to think of a scary figure. When someone hears the term appraiser, not so. They seem to think of a scary figure. Appraisers don't set tax rates for their wallet. Appraisers don't chase tax dollars. Appraisers don't set tax rates. Interested in fairly determining property values. An appraiser takes interested in fairly determining property taxes determined by a simple great pride in it. Appraisers property taxes one of these variables by a simple formula, the value. Appraisers only affect one.
And if you just close one of the dialogue, yeah, you started two there.
I got you.
You might want to start it over if you don't mind. Up in the upper left there.
Derek, are you doing it or am I doing it? Can't see the arrow.
Pay $100. Everyone paid the same amount. But he doesn't know how much each of you should pay. Might be happy. If everyone paid the same amount, guy who ordered a hot dog, caviar, might be happy. Appraisers. But what about the guy who ordered a hot dog? Property. Just like these appraisers, some people's property is worth more than others. And it's the appraiser's job to determine how much each property is worth. That's it. So, in the same way the value of these menu items would need to be determined, an appraiser places values on properties to ensure fairness.
Really a pretty good video.
Kevin, if you could just send us that link.
Yep, we got you. But I can't even shut it off.
Fire that up.
There we go.
Fire that up and take a look at it.
Okay, well, that worked good. Almost as good as last night. Let's try this again. We collect about $70 million or the city, county, park, and school, state do every year right now. When people talk about maybe there's another source of funding beyond property taxes.
Kevin, can I just stop you for a minute? I think you said we collect.
I'm sorry, we don't collect, the county collects it. The $70 million is collected based on evaluations in Minot. Of that $70 million, the percentages are right here. The city collects 37% of that. So property taxes are still a pretty good source of revenue in the city. For these 4 political subdivisions, the state just gets a little bit, of course. There are 2 websites I'd like to just introduce you to. The first one is the City of Minot website. And I'll click on this. This is a website that anybody can access from their home, computer, anywhere. We have a lot of realtors using it, insurance people. You can access by name, address. And when you do that, you can bring up the parcel, you can look at the drawing, you can get the idea of the valuation. A lot of good data here. People use it, and it actually goes even a little deeper. They can find out what homes are selling for in their neighborhood, And so a very good website. In addition to that, they can go to the Ward County website, and by virtue of this map, they can kind of drill down, and actually, we won't go any farther than that, but they can drill down and actually bring up a property tax statement from anybody's property. It's public. And we can send you this presentation so you'll have the link. But if anybody wants to see what their neighbor's paying, it can be done on a Ward County parcel viewer website. They just have to dig down a little bit farther, and then they can click on a parcel and get right to a property tax statement. Online databases we do a lot of research from everything that we can get our hands on to find out what rents are, income and expenses. The gentleman last night, he said, we don't have to give you our income and expenses, and that's true. So, but we have to find out those numbers anywhere we can, any public database we can. So we use online sources. We use retired police vehicles and pre-owned vehicles for the appraisers to drive. We use pen tablet computers. We use CAMA system. CAMA stands for Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal. And then we use laser measuring devices, which have become all the rage in our business, and we're not using tapes, any tape measures. We still use wheels when we're doing large outside walls, large buildings outside. On-site inspections, we're generally there every 7 to 10 years with the owner's consent. An interior review is conducted. Properties that have recently sold or have a building permit are also reviewed on-site. What's the cost of assessing? Our budget for 2018 was $670,000. If there's 18,000 parcels out there we're trying to value, it runs at about $36. Do the math. From what I've seen, that seems to be kind of an international standard at this point. If you're going to have an appraisal done for your house, for the bank, that'll be about $650. And to be quite honest with you, if we're pretty current on the property, usually we're pretty darn close. So we think we do a pretty good job for the dollars. The bottom note there indicates we're generally within 5% of median price. Changes, when I started in 1991, we used pencils and a hard property card. And it was 6 months later that we got our first, every appraiser got a computer. There was a staff of 5 people in the 70s. We've only increased that by 1 person. I would like to point out, in the old days, when you called the assessor's office and you asked, what was a house built? When was it built? What are the taxes? You would be on the phone for 5 to 8 minutes while the appraiser did the steps he had to look up to find the parcel number, to go to the file, to find the file, to come back and then read all that information off to you. So you were on the phone 5 to 10 minutes to get your answer, and now we can bring the parcel up in less than 5 seconds, and we can get you what you need, or you just go online and do it, or we can email you the property card. In the past, we didn't have city vehicles, we didn't have cell phones, you know, all the normal technology. Some of us are very good at using to this date. A website for the public's use and transparency is huge. People love that website. Assessor databases, we can generate reports. It's amazing how we can have people call and they can ask us how many swimming pools in town. We can actually generate that information. How many houses have steel siding? We can generate that information. Wow. Past compared to present for efficiency and workflow, we estimate one appraiser can almost do twice as much work now as what they used to be able to do. It was always considered that an appraiser back then would get about 450 to 500 houses assessed in a year. And by assessed, I mean actually went out and looked at it. Now we're doing between 800 and 900 a piece per season. We used to have the hard card, old Polaroid that would have to be glued on the card. We still have these as backup files, historical records, but now the same property card obviously is on computer, on a database. We went from tapes and wheels to laser. This is the past and still kind of the past. 1991, so future challenges for the assessor's office, management of more and more information. More and more people want more data. We have a company that calls once or twice a year and they want to buy the whole whole database. And I suppose that's for the Zillows and the and those online resources. I suppose that's where it's going. Currently, tax ownership lists the county uses in a different software than the city. So one of our challenges is we have all the values here, and at the end of the year, we have to put them up at the county system. That is done very clean right now. It takes about 5 minutes to send all our data once a year up to the county system so that they can send out a bill. However, when a property changes in Minot, the county auditor's office changes that information, mailing address, and at that point, we need to update our database in the assessor's office and also the one that City Hall uses. So our office is basically doing that twice. And we've looked at modules, we've looked at ways of transferring that, quicker resources, and at this point, we're kind of on hold for the new software that we're all talking about getting.
Kevin,
Yep.
That new software, first I'm hearing of it, I appreciate, but are we talking about a unified plan or unified program between the county and the city?
Well, they have Brand A, and if we end up with Brand A, it could mean some benefits. But if for what we need, it ends up to be Brand B, we still believe there'll be a module that can, and that we'll be able to talk back and forth so that we won't be doing double data entry. For many years, we always had the same software they did, 2 times in the last 30 years, and now they've gone on to a third piece of software, and we're still using the second version, and so the time will tell where we end up. We have some of the other challenges we have, dispelling this long traditionally held myth that true and full value, what people are assessed at, is something different than market value. And so we think we're gaining headway on that. Many people still think, well, my house, I know my house is worth $200,000, but why is it assessed at $195,000? And we're still trying to break through that. We have oversight from the state. Home Rule Charter, as I've discussed with the city manager a number of times, Home Rule Charter doesn't give us the opportunity to do a lot of things on our own. The state has oversight of assessors. I have a state supervisor that I report to in Bismarck. If I don't meet my continuing ed, if I do something wrong, she has authority to remove my certificate. And so we have authority that we have to answer to at the tax department. So there's benefits to that. All the rules are the same for Jamestown and Dickinson and everybody. Challenge to continue to build confidence in Minot's property assessments. On an occasion, a citizen doesn't agree. We work with them. We provide all the information we can to convince them, or at least tell them that we think we're close. Just some other ideas that we're going to suggest to them if they have a question about their assessment. Communicating with the property owner for permission to simply look at a property's exterior and interior. It's getting a little more difficult. People are a little bit more suspicious. There was a time when somebody was always home. That's not so much the case anymore. Or they're home and they're not going to come to the door and even talk to us. So we still use mail, and we leave a little door sticker. And at that point, that's about all we can do. We will be, as an office, discussing if there's some more updates, some more modernization that we can do in our going out and looking at houses' current procedures. Appraiser, assessor, ambassador. Our appraisers are ambassadors of the city of Minot. And we visited with leadership before, just recently, that if we have a citizen, if we have an employee, which we have 5 of them in our office that are probably 4 of them that are going to go see 3,000 houses a year. There's 3,000 times that they're probably standing in somebody's living room. And that person, now it's their opportunity to ask them questions about the city, how's this? A lot of times it's not even something that our people are going to know about, but they work for the city, so they should have the answer, right? And so we're looking at, one of the challenges we're looking at is whether we need to carry an FAQ with us or whether we can just have a link that we can hand to them, a little postcard or something. Here's where you can go and get your questions answered. Or here's a place to go and get answers. So we're having some preliminary discussion about that. We just want people to get the right place to find the information they're looking for. And with us being in 1/5 of the homes in Minot almost every year, it's probably going to be more so us that they're going to actually be asking than anybody else. Some other challenges. Local control property tax rate is another challenge. It is true that property taxes, the rules are set by the state. And we've discussed, already in various other meetings where there seems to be a little bit of a push-pull with that by some people. And so that's always a challenge. Will local control of property tax rates stay local, or will it go somewhere else? We're here to make sure that everybody's assessment is fair and equitable. In summary, we've tried to keep up with technology. We believe we have one of the most modern software packages in the state. For the last 20 years at least, when people have talked about Minot from other assessor communities, they've always thought we were always at least, if not the leader, but right there. We were the first to put digital pictures on our cards. That was with a different piece of software. We were one of the first, if not the second or third, if not the first, second, or third to have our online database online. So we think we've been a leader in using technology. And at this point, we think we've got a good future. We think we're ready for the upcoming challenges ahead, and we're always ready to answer any questions to the public. This is the type of report that you probably, we won't, be doing again. It's the past, present, and future. And other than the annual report you get in April, that's really where the interest is, what evaluation's doing and where's it at. So with that, that's all I have.
Thank you for an excellent report, City Assessor. Any questions for the City Assessor? Alderman Padragula.
Just a comment that I really appreciate the quality of the report, particularly focusing on challenges and your prognostication of what extra significant funding you might or might not need. This report makes a lot more sense to me, having spent better part of a day tagging along with your staff and actually making these inspections. It was a very eye-opening experience. Under those aldermen who haven't had the chance to do this, I would really recommend it. And one of the things I see as a frontier and opportunity really is that the assessors, as you said, go out and have significant contact with a lot of citizens, and they are ambassadors. And the one I tagged along with was an excellent, if not outstanding, ambassador for the city government. So I think this is an unexploited area in terms of reaching out and in terms of our public information activities and things like that. Usually, except for police or firefighters, people don't go, our city staff don't go into people's homes, and often it can be a conflictual kind of interaction, at least from the homeowner's part. So I think this is a very significant kind of public information, public outreach activity. Besides, of course, helping us support our activities. So I really appreciate this, and I will ask for a download of the slides and look through them very, very carefully. But thanks, and my kudos to you and your staff.
Right, and thank you very much, Alderman Padragula. And just to reassure the council, our staff is well aware that they are an ambassador. We've discussed it many times, so they do the best they can to be a good example. So.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. With that, we have reached the end of our agenda, and our meeting for today is adjourned. Thank you.